Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Stand National Emergency Conference Call, and with Bishop E.W. Jackson. And today our guest is Tom Fitton, and I'm going to turn the call over to Bishop Jackson right now to introduce our guest.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. And of course, I know it probably sounds like a broken record by now, but the emergency clearly continues. It just seems like there's never a passing day in which there's not some new development. It's almost as if this administration has just infected the whole government and the body politic in such a way that even if they're not directly involved, the influence, the very negative, toxic influence is felt in so many quarters. And our guest today has been somebody who has really been holding their feet to the fire, him and his organization. We'll get to bringing him to you in just a second, but as always, let's open up with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, once again, we are so very grateful to be Americans. In spite of all the problems that we yet have the freedom to address our government and address our society and make changes, or at least work freely to do so. Lord, but we believe there are forces at work against us to limit that freedom or to eliminate it, to make it impossible for us to do what our founding fathers intended, which was to be actively engaged in our government as a free people and to have the government working for us, not vice versa. And we thank you so much for leaders like Tom Fitton and for the organization Judicial Watch, because we know without accountability, there is no freedom. If the government is not accountable to the people, there is no freedom. And so we thank you for him, and thank you for all the leaders on this call and all that they are doing to try to bring this nation back to its foundational principles. Lord, we really believe that we are in the fight of our lives, that there has never been, maybe except for the Civil War, which was at least much more explicit and everyone understood what they were fighting about and that there was a fight. But other than that, I can't think of a time in which our country has been in greater peril from within. And we pray for your grace to bring us through it and to come out on the other side with a free constitutional republic, which is exactly what our founding fathers envisioned. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Help us to keep it so. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Well, thanks again, folks, for joining us. And as I said, the emergency continues. But you all know I am a person of eternal optimism, but that optimism and hope is not only based on my faith in God. Obviously, that's the foundation for it. It's also based upon the hope and encouragement that I get from people who are on the front lines fighting this battle without compromise, without equivocation, without backing up. And I know it at great personal sacrifice, which most of us don't even stop to think about. Well, our guest is one of those people who's been on the front lines for a long, long time. Tom Fitton has helped lead Judicial Watch since 1998 and took over as its head in 2003. Under his leadership, Judicial Watch has been named one of Washington's top 10 most effective government watchdog organizations. Folks, there are a lot of things that we would not know were it not for Judicial Watch. And you'll see Tom Fitton on Fox News and other places often talking about trying to make actually transparent the most transparent administration in history. Don't you just love that? We're the most transparent administration in history. Well, I think Judicial Watch has been in the forefront of demonstrating that they're not transparent at all. But Judicial Watch has tried to make sure that we as Americans at least know what they're doing in spite of their effort to hide it from us. So that having been said, Tom, again, welcome to National Emergency Conference Call, and we appreciate you joining us, and go ahead and take some time to share with us what Judicial Watch is doing now. And folks, again, if you have questions, press *6 as Tom is speaking so that when he's done, we can go right to your questions without any delay. Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bishop, for that generous introduction, and we're pleased to be doing the important work of government oversight here in Washington, D.C., and really across the nation. There's no law in this town when it comes to transparency, but for, frankly, Judicial Watch's activities, which, just for instance, last year we went to court.
Hey, Tom, Tom, let me interrupt you. You're breaking up. Is that our line or is that something on your end?
It sounds a little bit shaky on my end. Is this better?
That sounds much better. Yes.
Okay. And we're last year, for instance, we went to court to get records from the administration, federal court under the Freedom of Information Act, 45 times, which is more than all the media combined. So we're doing the work of oversight. And, my concern is that we don't have self-government anymore in D.C., in large measure thanks to this transparency and oversight crisis. You may have elections, you vote. There are campaigns, you see the political commercials. They're raising money, the politicians as they run for office. But when a Congress comes to Washington after being elected and with its eyes closed writes a check for $1.5 trillion as what it did in December, that is not oversight. That's not transparency. And then, of course, the agencies believe they don't have to follow the law and don't need to be transparent under the Freedom of Information Act, the transparency law, which is unique to the United States. It's been around for 40-plus years. And then, of course, we have this president who thinks that he can govern by fiat, and as I like to say, he endeavors, often successfully so, to be a despot. So we have the forms of democracy, but without the oversight, we don't have the practice. And I tell you, the Founding Fathers knew this, and that's why they thought transparency was important. And one of the I forget the actual founding father. I feel for fear of misattributing, for fear of misattribution, I won't say who I think it is, but the quote is apt. Ignorance is forever governed by tyranny, or tyranny forever governs ignorance. So if we don't know what our government's up to, you might as well call the whole thing off. But Judicial Watch is showing that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's a way forward, and it's one way of bringing the government back down to earth and under our control. And that is to use the law and to use the wonderful mechanisms given to us under law to hold the government to account and to put us on equal footing when we go to court against administrations, whether it be Republican or Democrat administrations, to make sure that they're doing things above the board and that the records that we're trying to get about government decision-making are disclosed as they're supposed to be. Because I tell you, with big government comes big secrecy, and when you have this secrecy, it's the sun. It's shining the light on government operations that prevents corruption, and and both exposes it and it ends it. And so that's our goal here. And obviously, we also sue the government over when it commits misconduct directly, whether it be politicians personally or agencies directly for spending money they don't have the authority to spend or violating the rights of people. But the bulk of our work has been under the Freedom of Information Act, and we battled during the Clinton years. We battled the Clinton administration over records. They were shredding records over in the Clinton Commerce Department, selling seats on trade missions that we were paying for to companies so that they could get on these planes to go abroad and get government support for their contracts with other governments like China. You can imagine what happened then. And we exposed that, and I think we stopped it and reformed the process as a result. And, of course, during the Bush administration, the Republicans at least tell you they don't like the Freedom of Information Act, so you know you're in for a fight. Democrats, they tell you they love it, then they shred documents. And so we battled the Bush administration secrecy, and he was rightly criticized for secrecy. And that's why President Obama talked about wanting to be transparent. He knew it's a winning issue. But, of course, he comes to town and quickly becomes the great stone wall on issues of government conduct. He agrees with the Bush administration position that the records of those visiting him shouldn't be subject to disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act, that those Fannie and Freddie Mac records, we spent $80 billion bailing them out, and they now, those government agencies now backstop mortgages totaling $5 trillion. That goes on the red side of the ledger, by the way, if you're tracking our government finances. But those records aren't subject to FOIA, and that was a decision the president made. First major transparency decision of his administration. And guess what the personal benefit to him was? because we were asking for records about political funding of those Fannie and Freddie back when they were, quote, private entities. Guess who was the biggest beneficiary, relatively speaking, of that political funding? Mr. Obama, when he was in the Senate. So so if you can't know how $80 billion and $5 trillion in debt is being managed, how that's being managed by our government, that isn't transparency. But the other thing is that because FOIA is such an effective law, we're able to highlight the fact that Congress isn't doing its job. And Congress is more than a bit chagrined by us showing them up, by getting documents about Benghazi, by getting documents about the IRS, by getting documents about Obamacare, and a number of other issues that everyone is interested in. Last year, it was Judicial Watch's litigation on Benghazi that exposed the White House was behind all these big lies that were being put out there, blaming it on a internet video and spontaneous demonstrations when it was an out-and-out terrorist attack that they knew about at the time. We showed that the White House was behind those lies. And in response, Speaker Boehner was so outraged that Congress hadn't gotten this information after nearly 2 years, he agreed to finally a select committee on Benghazi. And it was the Judicial Watch that got these records about the IRS that not only showed all the White House lies about the IRS scandal, about, it was only in Cincinnati. No, in fact, it was in Washington. It was a run out of Washington, D.C.'s headquarters. There was no politics involved. We showed that how Democratic senators were pressuring the IRS to go after the Tea Party and conservatives. And then we found that not only was the IRS abusing its authority, but they were talking to the Department of Justice about the idea of potentially prosecuting the very same groups that they were suppressing. So that was and it was our litigation that forced the administration to disclose to the American people that they had supposedly lost Lois Lerner's emails. They were trying to cover that up. And then, of course, it was our litigation that exposed again, maybe they didn't lose Lois Lerner's emails. So to go back to that Benghazi record fight, one thing we noticed when we got those big documents last year is where Hillary's emails? We thought, well, maybe we didn't ask the right way, or they were pretending to not have to search it. So we asked again. They rejected again our request. So we sued again just to be sure. I assumed maybe she just didn't use emails, which would have been, I think, a common sense approach maybe from her perspective. Guess what? It turned out she was using emails. From the day she came into office, she set up a secret email account for the sole purpose of conducting government business, away from the prying eyes of the American people who had a right to that information under law. And I can tell you, the Benghazi Select Committee started pushing and asking questions, but the pressure of our litigation, I guarantee you, forced them to finally disclose this info. Because we pushed for documents on the Benghazi issue with the Department of Justice, and they gave us the same stuff we had gotten last year. And then we said, well, what about Hillary Clinton? Tell us more. Where did you search? And then they pushed back and said, well, there may be other things, other places we need to look. And they finally admitted to a court there were other places they were going to be looking in February. A few weeks later, guess what pops out in the news? The secret email account. So now we're in the middle of it. We're asking the courts to look at it. And I can tell you, Mrs. Clinton has significant, if we had an honest Justice Department, criminal liability for this withholding and concealment and basically stealing government records from the American people. And now we find out that she possibly deleted records as well. And don't rely on Congress to get to the heart of this, because we're getting information Congress won't get and is unwilling to take the steps to get. Because even though they have great powers, for political reasons, they're afraid to exercise them, because it's hard work to hold an administration to account, to go to court, to issue contempt citations, to enforce that, and to maybe shut off funding and do all the tough work you need to do to bring a lawless administration to account. And of course, more than a few Republicans are thinking, boy, if that's the way Obama can operate, maybe our guy can operate that way as well, and do what he needs to do. Of course, he's going to do the right thing, but don't worry about the public interest in making sure he's accountable to the law, because we can just trust the Republicans And so that's why they don't want to go hard against the Obama administration so that they can get away with the same thing. I think some cynics would suggest if they take power again from and become president and take the presidency. So I can tell you all, there's not a scandal you're interested in, there's not an issue you're concerned about, ranging from immigration to the right to life, to the protection of marriage, to national security, to Obamacare, to the government takeover of the internet, to the government takeover of our economic sector, to congressional ethics, and what our government is up to generally. Judicial Watch is your watchdog in Washington, and we are one of the most largely supported, widely supported organizations here in Washington on either the left or the right. We have over 350,000 active supporters, and those of you on the line know what a substantial number that is. And these are folks who are active and give us actual support. And that's not on top of the folks who are general supporters of our work and don't provide us financial support. And it tells you that this is an opportunity. We're always looking for ways to outreach, Bishop, to the American people who don't necessarily share our conservative outlook. But I tell you, if you talk about transparency and accountability and battling corrupt government, there's not a liberal or Democrat or conservative or Republican who would argue with you. And I can tell you that's the way forward if you want to do outreach. There's an opportunity for leadership on the movement side, and I tell you, the faith-based movement have a special place to argue in matters of bringing back a sense of ethics and morality to our nation's public life. These corrupt politicians who think they can get away with anything, just what passes for ethics in Washington wouldn't allow the rest of us to go to sleep at night. And the more we can call attention to that, I think the more we can bring those who to our cause who might not otherwise agree with us. So I've gone on for a bit. I want to save time for questions, and like I said, we're investigating everything. So I'm happy to talk about what we do and how we do things, but also about other topics I've been able to cover. But I hope we're able to get to them via your questioning.
Okay, thank you so much, Tom. Folks, if you have questions, press *6 and get in queue. Tom, let me start. Let me ask a general question, then let's go down the line with each of the major subjects. First of all, you are involved in seeking the documents that apparently no longer the emails that no longer exist because Hillary had them on a private server and they're personal, and she erased them all. So are you involved in trying to get those emails exposed, get them made public?
Oh yeah, they should have been searched and given to us in the 20 or so Freedom of Information Act lawsuits we filed against this administration on Benghazi, her using the State Department to raise money for herself and her foundation. And they pretended to us that they had searched these records. In fact, they hadn't. And so we're in court now trying to get justice over that misconduct and get justice for us being misled. But we've also filed separate requests for all those records, and we're prepped to sue for them as soon as we're able. So we've got 10 lawsuits that have been impacted by this. We filed a few more that get at this issue directly, and also we're prepared to file up to 20 more to get this info. This is a scandal that goes beyond the State Department, goes beyond Hillary Clinton, it goes to the White House and the Justice Department, and who knows what other agency conducted itself like this to keep documents away from the American people.
One other quick question, and folks, we're going to come right to your questions. Tom, there is a lot of an undercurrent that this president has been engaging in impeachable offenses. He's violated the Constitution both implicitly and explicitly. He's just done some things that ought to rise to that level, but there's no political appetite for it. Is there anything that you're looking at now that you think could potentially be a smoking gun or something that could maybe bring people together around the idea that this guy is truly lawless and really just doesn't care about how our Constitution works or his role in it, and and therefore a drastic step needs to be taken, maybe something that goes as far as impeachment?
Well, I think there's been plenty there to have this president impeached in terms of his refusal to abide by the rule of law, his upending of the immigration system, his trading of terrorists for the Bowie Bergdahl, his misconduct in Benghazi, his misconduct with his IRS. His IRS suppressed an entire political movement against him in the run-up to his reelection. That's how you steal an election in plain sight. Now, but in the end, it is a political question as to whether impeachment can proceed in the House, and obviously the Senate needs 2/3 votes. And so the numbers I'm aware of, Bishop Barr, the polling shows, maybe 38% of the people support impeachment inquiry or some type of process like that. So it's a question of activism and political leadership here to get majority support for that in order to have Congress effectively do and accomplish what you want to do. You don't want to begin impeachment when most Americans don't want it to happen. It's going to be failure, and that failure might end up being used to justify and endorse this type of behavior. So what is it we do as citizens and activists, not only in the faith community but in the political class here in Washington, to talk about this issue in a way that educates people and gets people more comfortable with the idea of impeaching and removing a president with the lack of ethics, morality, and contempt for the Constitution that this president has?
Okay, Bill, let's go to the calls.
Okay. I believe we got Pastor Leon 3 on 7921. Go ahead.
Pastor 3, go right ahead.
How are you? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if there's any involvement from Judicial Watch in the matters pertaining to what the governor of Indiana is facing and many of the other states that passed a freedom of religion law to protect the religious liberties. Are there anything that your organization is involved in to continue that movement, and where do you see that going from a legal standpoint? It seems to be a lot of discussion on challenging those laws in each state.
Well, we've been trying to educate people as best we're able. We're not necessarily been associated, although we've taken a lot of legal investigations and filed many briefs in support of traditional marriage and highlighted the involvement and the excesses of the homosexual activist movement in the government and all the craziness that you read about. So we've been aggressive there. I'll warn you all on the phone, and you, Pastor, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding of what's happening in Indiana is that this is a state version of the federal law, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, that provides individuals to the ability to freely exercise their religion without undue restriction by the government, and to have that argument available to them that the restriction on the government is impacting your free exercise of religion, and that being a defense in any government sanction against you potentially. For instance, if you're a baker in Indianapolis who doesn't want to participate in a gay marriage ceremony and doesn't want to bake a cake for having because your conscience tells you and your understanding of how to exercise your religion in your daily life is would preclude you from participating in that ceremony, and that would be a legitimate defense under this law. But of course, in the end, the court would have to decide whether it's legitimate. So it's no protection. All it is, it provides another way possibly for you at great expense to defend yourself against government oppression. And this is what this is about. This is an attack on Christianity in many ways. I don't think the government can be neutral in matters of faith and morals, and certainly not neutral on marriage, because you're going to run into this issue of the First Amendment. And I think the First Amendment ought to prevail if indeed there is gay marriage that is recognized across the nation, as it is already in many states. But I tell you, it is going to be an ongoing assault against the traditional expressions of the free expression of your religion. I mean, as far as the government's concerned, they want you to be able to. Their idea of your exercising your religious liberty is to go to church on Sunday, and any manifestation of that in your work life, in your interactions with your fellow citizens, or even talking about these issues in the public square can be restricted. And the famous examples we remember in Russia, you had the Russia Orthodox Church run by the Communist Party, or in China you have I'm a Catholic, and we all know about the secret bishops and cardinals the popes have ordained, because they have to be in secret because of the Catholic Church run by the Chinese government there. And I think this is where they want to go, and using gay marriage, which is damaging enough to the culture and to our immortal souls, as my dear old mother would like to say, but they use it as another vehicle to attack that institution of independent religion. So it's a battle that goes in many ways our battles are not just about what we're talking about, meaning gay marriage. It's about an attack on Christianity that is more than about gay marriage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go to the next question.
Okay, we have another call here from ending in 0337. Go ahead and ask Tom your question.
Hi, this is Dawn Wildman. I'm the Deputy Director for Fire Coalition. And thank you, Pastor Jackson, for putting on this call. I appreciate everything that you do, and Mr. Fitton. I had a question. We were looking at the FOIA documents that Judicial Watch just released in regard to the Homeland Security release of convicted criminal aliens. And there's a page in here that's an overview of ICE releases. But it appears that some of this information has been redacted. And I was wondering if we knew why it was redacted.
Do you have the document in front of you, ma'am?
Yes.
And what, is there a code next to it, like B5 or B6 or something like that?
It is 2014 ICLI, has a bunch of numbers. It's the document that says for official use only. And,
right. And next to the blacked out material, is there a B
no.
code or something? Okay, well, typically what happens is they release information and they have the ability to redact it or black it out. And they can black out pre-decisional information, or they say they can black it out. It's discretionary, and the courts, we can fight in the courts over that, but end up losing often. And basically anything prior to a final decision, and the back and forth between government officials, the sort of stuff that we would really love to see, this most transparent administration in history often blacks out. So I have a feeling that's what the information is.
Okay, let's go to the next question. We're holding Tom a little late, but go right ahead.
Okay, our next caller, phone number ending in 6478. Go ahead and ask Tom your question.
Yes, thank you. This is Ken Ward. I'm with watchdog.org, and I wanted to follow up on what EW was asking regarding Hillary Clinton's emails. It's my understanding that pretty much everything on the servers that she had have been wiped clean, but I was wondering if your organization has been able to obtain any sort of detail on the emails that Hillary had with her brother, Tony Rodham, or with Governor McAuliffe here in Virginia.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we have material on or requests about that active, and we're obviously renewing our interest in getting access to that information. But it shows you how damaging Mrs. Clinton's actions were. We had filed 160 Freedom of Information Act requests with the State Department, 20 lawsuits. I can tell you we were dropping lawsuits based on their promise they had looked and couldn't find records. What a fraud. And that's just Judicial Watch. Think of all the other litigation the State Department's involved in, or congressional investigations. So this is a major issue, and as you point out, there's new scandals with respect to Mrs. Clinton's brother and people close to the Clinton orbit, like Governor McAuliffe, who we've always known to be corrupt. And if I could leave your listeners with one thing, Bishop, is don't get fooled into the Washington game of analyzing what Mrs. Clinton was doing at state as to whether she was a good Secretary of State and what were her accomplishments, that's a distraction. She ran it as a racket, and her racket was to take her government position, as they've always done, the Clintons, and use it to feather her own personal and political nest, so she could take more power to do more of the same. And if you approach it like that, don't get distracted by the policy discussions, but focus on the corruption. And I think we would all do well. However important the policy issues are, we have to keep our eyes on those as well. But to understand so much of what generates Washington activity and is behind Washington and moves on any one issue, have anything to do but with the issue at hand. It's over who's going to make money, who's going to get positioned politically, and other corrupt activities. So I hate to be cynical, but in many ways, if we don't know what the problem is, we can't solve it. And if we just think that coming in and arguing policy and wondering why we're not getting anywhere, I would suggest it's because we're not looking at the reform of the corrupt practices of Washington to allow regular policy discussions to move forward, as opposed to being diverted by corrupt acts and misconduct.
Well, look, the highest policy achievement was the Russian reset button, and everybody knows how that went. They couldn't even get the language right on what they were saying. So,
well, you know, she's hitting reset while she's getting money through the foundation from Russians. There's your story there.
We've got two more questions. Let's go right to that, Bill. Next question. Hello, Bill?
This is Jim Kuiper. I just have a question concerning Judicial Watch's overseeing any of the issues of Sharia law being implemented throughout the United States, or any of the American law for American courts actions that are happening throughout for the number of states.
We haven't been involved directly in that, but we've taken some strong action and uncovered really damaging documents highlighting how these front groups for terrorist organizations masquerading as civil rights organizations for Muslims here in the United States were pressuring both the Bush administration and the Obama administration to censor words that would offend Muslim jihadists. And we're in this absurd position of not recognizing the religious and cultural roots of the terrorist threat that has murdered so many Americans and we're at war with currently in many regions around the world. It does not mean you go to war, as the left would argue, against all Muslims by recognizing that too much of mainstream Muslim religious thought, and certainly the thought animating our enemies, justify this terrorism based on their strongly held religious beliefs, and those strongly held religious beliefs involve the overthrow of Western civilization as we understand it, meaning making all of our laws subject to the law as given, passed down to this generation, the Muslims would argue, from Muhammad and his teachings, and as interpreted by religious leaders in Mohammedism. So this is a recognition of the threat and their goals, and it's funny, by not recognizing what the enemy is up to and what their goals are, it puts us at risk for taking wrong steps and putting our people at risk unnecessarily. And it also, ironically, despite their trying to be seen as being respectful of the Muslim religion, they're actually being patronizing because they're ignoring the Muslim religion and not recognizing it and not taking it at face value. And, one of my favorite old titles from one of the books, the anti-communist movement, some of you may remember, You Can Trust the Communists to Be Communists. Why don't we just take their religious protestations and and descriptions of their face at face value. And we are in court exposing how this political correctness on this issue is, and we've, as I said, uncovered documents showing that it's resulted in something George Orwell would have recognized, words being sent down the memory hole. I mean, we've heard that you can write things, as long as you say things and don't write them down in some of these anti-terrorism programs, that's the only way to talk about the jihadist threat. As long as you don't write it down, you can talk about it. If you write it down, it will be censored.
Wow. Tom, we got one more question. We only going to have time, folks, for one more question. Let's go to that question, Bill.
Phone number ending in 8803. You're on with Tom Fitton. Go ahead and ask your question. Phone number ending in 8803.
Oh,
it's star 6.
Thank you. This is Mike Valerio here. Is it getting more difficult to sue and get justice served as more and more liberal justices are being appointed by Obama, to take care of these suits in courts? Are things getting worse for justice to be served in this country?
It is getting more difficult, and certainly here in the District of Columbia, he's been able to pack the courts, certainly at the appellate level, with more appointees, and there are more majorities in favor of liberal judicial outlooks in more appellate courts throughout the land than prior to his coming into office. Ironically, on the Freedom of Information Act, it's a Republican-Democrat issue. That some Republican justices are much too deferential, certainly here in the district, to the government's arguments as to why documents should be withheld. But on the other hand, look at the gay marriage cases. How many Bush appointees and Republican appointees decided they had the power as a district court judge to overturn the laws put in place by the people of the state that recognize the reality, both moral and historical, that marriage is between a man and a woman. Judges are only one part of the problem, in the sense that we can't rely on the judiciary necessarily to protect us from the abuses of government. We have to take action ourselves. Congress has got to step up to the plate. We need more honest officials in the executive branch. And I can tell you, and this is, we're always upset about the way things are going on in the country, and I think this is the one thing I'll leave you all with, Bishop and Mike, is that we are so upset about how corrupt Washington is. But I can tell you, after meeting with many visitors from abroad, the State Department brings in these visitors to Judicial Watch once a month or so because they love what we do. These citizens from other countries who are trying to, in very difficult circumstances, get their governments to be corrupt, cleaner and more transparent. And we tell them what we do. And some of these people would have be murdered and have their families murdered, or they'd be put in jail, or they'd lose their livelihoods if they were to do the work that Judicial Watch is doing. And I can tell you, and I'm not talking about in the worst places in the third world. I'm talking about in places like France, where there's no conception of a Judicial Watch non-governmental group out there policing and asking the government what it's up to and holding the president to account and being able to say the strong things we say about the misconduct of this president. And, the same that happens when liberals are complaining about Republicans they don't like. It's a wonderful country that we're able to do this, and it's a precious, precious right we have to be able to go to court and do this, because there's no other place in the world where this is allowed to the extent it's allowed in the United States. And that's why the left doesn't like these laws. That's why some Republicans are happy to see them go away. And that's why we need to be kind of vigilant and diligent in using these laws, because it is a precious right we have to go into federal court and demand that the federal government own up for what it's doing and give documents. And you should know individually at your local and state level, those laws are often applicable. So you can ask your local government what they're up to. Ask your school district what they're up to. You know the issues more than I do. You can think of the issues that you would want to find out about. Right? Go to the Internet, figure out what your Freedom of Information Act law is at the state, and make your inquiry. You may not get a response. Oftentimes you will get a response. And if you need any more direct help, please contact Judicial Watch, and we'll see what we can do to kind of either educate you or get the Freedom of Information Act request out for you or with you, or just tell you how to put it in and help you evaluate what response, if any, you get. So we stand willing to assist you as best we're able, given everything else we're doing. But anything we can do to help, we'll try.
Well, thank you, Tommy. Look, you stayed longer than we asked you to. We appreciate that. Now, for people who want to become part of that over 350,000 or 60,000 supporters that you've got, how do they do that? Go to the website? What should they do?
Yeah, they should go to our website at judicialwatch.org. And I encourage, obviously, everyone to support us. But as importantly, I encourage you to get the word out about the work we're doing. Share it with your constituencies. Share it with the folks who come to your churches. Share it with your friends and family. People love this information. They love dirt, and this is the dirt on what the government's up to. And it's somewhat comical at times, to see Mrs. Clinton, for instance, say that she, was using a secret email account because it was convenient, and then she admits later, it's uncovered later, she had 3 or 4 devices she was walking around with, as if that sounds convenient. It's what crooks do, or to keep themselves from going to jail, as you kind of seen even at the local level, is sometimes comical, however, and sad, however distasteful it is and harmful it is to the body politic and to civic society.
Tom, thanks so much for the time, and thanks for all that you're doing. And anytime you want to come back and talk to us about any initiative you have or looking for help, please do. We'd love to have you.
Hey, thank you, Bishop, and appreciate your leadership and activism as well.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Well, folks, that was Tom Fitton. Judicial Watch is a heroic organization. Look, just in the couple minutes that we have left, let me say this. Indiana is in a crisis right now because of a law that they passed that is entirely reasonable, entirely appropriate, trying to protect the many Christians who have been harassed, fined, lost their businesses, lost their jobs because they simply cannot participate in same-sex marriages, ceremonies, whatever they choose to call them. They have not turned gay people away at the door. They have not made them sit in the back of the room. They have not told them, go around to the back door. They've not told them, we won't do business with you. They have simply said, I cannot participate in your same-sex ceremony. And for that, they have been persecuted and harassed and vilified and slandered and called bigots and haters and protested. And all this law is trying to do is protect those Christians and others who, for sincerely held religious beliefs, don't want to participate in a particular activity, not deny you the right to come into their establishment or deny you the right to any of their services, but simply to say, I cannot participate in that activity. And you would think that the world is about to come to an end. It's the same thing as in our RFRA law federally and as in states all across the country. But, of course, what this is all about is not about the text of the law. It's about intimidating Christians and believers in traditional marriage to shut up or pay a very heavy price. And, unfortunately, you got the whole stupid sports world buying into this nonsense, and of course many in the corporate world buying into it with this hysterical reaction. The very thing they criticized the people in Ferguson for, which is for reacting before they knew what the facts were and protesting and rioting and going crazy, they're doing the same thing in this issue. They don't know what the facts are. They don't know what the law really reads. In fact, the law gives even less protection than one would expect, because all the law says is that when someone demands that you provide that service, you have a religious liberty defense that you may bring in court. That's all it says. It doesn't even say you're going to win it. It just says you can bring that defense. And for that, you would think everyone is declared, let's go kill all the homosexuals. I mean, it's insane. And by the way, I stand with those who say, I would not support something that says, you can't come into my store. I suspect you're gay. You might be gay. You can't come into my establishment. I will not sell you an ice cream cone. That's not at all what this is about. It is about protecting Christians from having this stuff forced on them and on their families It's not about not wanting to serve people. And by the way, once more, I'll say this. This is not analogous to Jim Crow and racial discrimination. Folks, what hair I have left, I feel like pulling out sometime, because this is what they're using. They are manipulating people on the basis of emotion. They are using the black civil rights paradigm when it is absolutely nothing like it, nothing whatsoever like it. As one of my colleagues said earlier today, wanting to practice a homosexual lifestyle is not the same as having black or brown skin. How can you equate those two? They are absolutely unrelated, and yet they have successfully had many people buy into it in the media, in the corporate world, and so forth. So, folks, I stand with Indiana. I think Mike Pence needs to buck up. He needs to stand strong. And what we need is not mea culpa and apologies. We need a spirited defense of our position that affirms the humanity of every homosexual. They are human beings who are deserving of respect. They should not be abused or mistreated or hurt or harmed. I do not support that. But on the other hand, Christians have a right to draw a line based on the commands of Scripture as to what is right and what is wrong. And Christians believe that homosexuality is morally wrong. Tell me, when was the last time you heard that on television? You won't. We believe, because the Scripture teaches, homosexuality is morally wrong. And therefore, we don't want to be participants in any ceremony that celebrates that. I mean, why is that? That's not rocket science. But yet people treat it, of course, they know what they're doing, because the whole point is, the point is not really the law or fairness or even quote unquote equality. The point is intimidation, to intimidate you and me to shut up, go off into the corner of your church and go believe what you want to believe over there. But when you come out into the public square, you forget all of that and you believe like we want you to believe, or at least you act like you do. That's really the message. And folks, we're simply not going to back down. We're going to pray for homosexuals. We're going to love them. We're going to treat them with respect and with dignity. We're going to stand firm on our principles. And ultimately, we're going to stand before God and give an account. And that's what ultimately matters. Whether it's popular or not, we're going to stand before God and give an account. And by the way, so are they. So are they. And so we're not going to back down. Don't you back down. I believe this. We cannot be defeated if we will not quit. One final thing. We need to be aware. We've got the Ministers Taking a Stand is having a conference call at 12 noon on Thursday, this coming Thursday. If you are a minister, a pastor, please join us. If you know a minister, a pastor who's concerned about these issues, please share the information with them, have them join us. If you don't have the information, contact Bill at standamerica.us. We'll be happy to give it to you. We got a big agenda for this coming meeting, a lot of stuff to cover, including this whole Indiana debacle. Pastor Threet asked about that earlier. That situation is horrible, and we need to encourage churches to take a stand in that situation. So be aware of that, and we'll be back with you next week. Bill, do we know who our guest is next weekend?
Not yet.
Okay, but we got somebody good coming up for you.
Yeah, we've got some in the pipeline. As soon as I nail that down, I will be sending out a notice on it.
Okay, so folks, pastors, ministers, join us on Thursday at 12 noon Eastern time for our call. Oh, and one other thing, we are going to be doing everything we can to see to it that Ginsburg and Kagan, and I think Sotomayor as well, recuse themselves from considering the same-sex marriage cases that they're going to be hearing in April, because they've already performed same-sex ceremonies. Folks, you cannot have already taken a public position on the issue and then claim that you can do an objective legal analysis of whether this issue, whether this particular practice falls under the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. They've already decided that on an emotional and political and ideological basis. So what is the point of them sitting and hearing the case? I mean, to me, it's a violation of every kind of ethics and every kind of rule against conflict of interest. But they're going to probably do it because they're more interested in changing the culture than they are in being true to the law. So we're going to be telling you more about that and doing everything we can to try to awaken these Supreme Court justices that in some cases they shouldn't even be hearing the case, and to strengthen the resolve of those who are going to decide it constitutionally. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives anybody the right to marry a person of the same sex. Every woman has the right to marry any man that chooses to marry her. Every man has the right to marry any woman who chooses to marry him, regardless of their color, their creed, their background. But there's nothing in the Constitution that says, so now we got to say, well, men have a constitutional right to marry men and women have a constitutional right to marry women. No how, no way, never. So listen, thank you all. God bless you. Stay in the fight. We cannot be defeated. If we will not quit, we'll be back with you next Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern Time.